So the book is a adaptation of the Tao Te Ching, which it describes a relatively simple to comprehend but difficult to describe, if that makes sense, philosophy.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. And today I have a guest. His name is Darryl Canaus, and he recently released a book called The Architect Way: Requirements for a Universal Framework. So welcome to the show, Darryl.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So let's just jump right in and tell me about your book. What is your book about?
So the book is a adaptation of the Tao Te Ching, which is the foundational literature of the Taoist philosophy. It was written 400 BC by Lao Tzu, who is, I think, just referred to as the teacher. It is the Tao Te Ching is translated as the book of the way of virtue, is one translation, Tao being the way and Te being virtue. And it describes a relatively simple to comprehend but difficult to describe, if that makes sense, philosophy. And so I found it to be really useful. It's got a poetic cadence to it. There's 81 chapters, and each of them has some good insights in how to understand the universe and the world and live in it. And I thought, this is great material to translate into system architecture and technology design. So that's what the book is. It's a retelling of the Tao Te Ching in the language of technology and architecture and technology development and leadership.
Awesome. I mean, leadership's a topic close to my heart. I mean, as a business coach, it's the number one thing I help my clients with. And what I always start out with is, if you managed your team a little bit differently, you could work less hours. And most of the time they're like, there's no way that's possible. It's impossible. It seems so simple. And it kind of does seem simple, but leadership in and of itself is a huge topic. And I don't think people understand that sometimes. So let's talk a little bit about, I was noticing, I love, it says there's 81 chapters in your book. That's a lot of chapters. Let's talk a little bit about decision making. So,
Sure.
How have you applied this to decision making?
Sure. So one of the things that I found is, in my experience as being a product leader and over the years and leading engineering teams and running through agile processes, is decisions around priorities and determining objectives is one of the most difficult parts of a product owner's job. There already exists a couple of models for how we can make decisions. Data-driven decision making is clearly an important part of technology efforts, and that's one that is a great mechanism for optimizing and for getting systems to move closer to their intended objectives. There's also decision making around there's cultural values corporate values that companies may advocate for within their companies, but there's an aspect of understanding what those objectives should be and how to prioritize, which is where the practical philosophy can come into play. When you adopt a philosophy that, say, for example, like is reflected in the Tao Te Ching, that emphasizes harmony and eternity or the eternal nature of things, which you can kind of translate in technology terms as a sort of sustainable system. When you embrace those aspects as sort of virtuous components of your systems, then decision-making starts to become an exercise in aligning your choices to this path of harmony or this path of sustainability. And there's a really interesting way of looking at how you can arrive at these end states through the mechanisms that are described in the way of the Tao, through interconnectedness, adaptability, balance, and simplicity. And when you use those four kind of constructs as a way to think about your decisions and try to align those into ways of harmony and sustainability, decisions start to, and this again is very sort of Taoist notion, they start to flow and you start to feel less resistance. You've got a philosophy that is sort of simple enough that you can articulate it in a few words. It can ground you in your decisions so you can make them quickly, and they sort of align up into more free-flowing technology solutions.
Well, it seems like also, am I right that it gives you more of like a consistent framework for decision making as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the the ability to have that have a framework that you can call upon in and that lines up in each of the situations where you would want to make your decisions obviously is beneficial. And I think that there's a part of the of consistency that translates into an authenticity and an integrity that can extend through not just your professional life, but in your personal life as well. And I think there's an aspect, at least in my view, that of philosophical context switching that lots of us do when we go into our jobs. We step into the office and we sort of put on a different worldview because it's sort of the requirements of our job, and then we go home to our families, and then we have a different sort of set of views on how things should work. And a good practical philosophy that can inform your leadership style is one that feels authentic and true to you, and that is consistent not just in your professional life but also in your personal life. And when you find these notions and these virtues like harmony and sustainability, you can start to see how those do translate, and they do sort of cross over, and they allow you to show up at work and in your professional life without that overhead of the kind of context switching that you may have to do in your personal life.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that a lot of people, when they teach leadership to someone else, they teach that well, first you have to do this, and then you have to do this, and then you have to do this. And I think that the framework part of it is probably correct, but how each individual person executes each step is just that, individual, because we're all a little bit different in which direction we lean on a topic. And so I sometimes feel like these leadership frameworks are a little too rigid for everyone. And what I always encourage my clients is find the way you best handle that step and handle it that way. I have clients who they have weekly meetings with their staff, like complete staff meetings. I'm super opposed to that myself because I feel like monthly is a better cadence, and there's easy check-ins that you can do, but they do it weekly. Then others, they do it monthly, others do it bi-monthly. It's all about what's comfortable for them and what makes them feel like they're in control. So how do these Taoist principles apply to, say, the leadership paradigm?
So one of the things that that you see often in the Taoist literature and is talked about as one of the sort of core philosophical principles is the Wu Wei, which is the idea of effortless action, and that it's the sense of flow, and it's the idea of very little friction in the operations of things as a virtue. And one of the things that as a leader that can be helpful is when you can recognize that there is organizational friction and be sort of tuned into that notion that your effective leadership is one that perhaps reduces friction, and you can say easily translates into increased efficiency and just better operations. But recognizing that flow is a key part of it. And so, like most of the philosophical frameworks, I think keeping it in mind and having it at the ready to inform how you view things is a big part of making it work. And so when you keep these principles in mind, that's the main point of it is, is this meeting really going to be effective, or am I just adding friction to schedules? And are my operational choices really increasing the balance and simplicity of our systems, thereby leading to easier flow and effortless action? Or am I just generating more work for people?
Well, what made you take these Taoist principles and apply them to technology? What inspired that?
So very similar to what I was describing earlier about this notion of context switching. So I my time in working at some pretty big companies, I step into those and they've got their leadership principles and trying to embody those, and just recognizing that the ethic with which I approached my work was very much driven by a set of principles that make work efficient and very bottom line oriented. And then coming home and not feeling that same way, about my family, and that obviously we don't have profit-oriented relationships with our family, and it's not exactly how we want to view that stuff. So I became interested in how can I bring some consistency across, and feel more authentic and real, and still, of course, add value for the company. I still, when you're in a leadership position, your relationship with your work should still be one of value and experience, and all that kind of stuff. And so that sort of existed in as a unresolved personal, maybe issue is overstating it, but as a thing that was sort of nagging at me, like, how can I resolve those things? And then separately, philosophy just in general is a really interesting area for me, and I've always found myself gravitating towards non-dualist ideas, and ones that described a metaphysics that I felt could be rooted in some form of logic and reasoning, which is, you'll find a lot of that stuff in Zen literature, and that sort of domain, and Taoism is one of those. And so, reading in the Tao Te Ching, you have those moments. I guess this is how most philosophy sort of registers with people. The light bulb goes off, and you say to yourself, like, oh, this is, I get it. I get how this works. I get how I can apply these principles. And so, just as I'll give you an example, the very first line in the Tao Te Ching is translated in various ways as the Tao that can be described is not the eternal Tao, which is a way of saying the real way that things work is kind of beyond words in a lot of ways. And the way that registered with me in the language of my professional career was, that the system architectures that can be fully documented are never really the full architecture. It's not always the thing. There's people, there's processes, there's things that change. And that understanding that your approach to systems needs to have some appreciation for what extends beyond what can be documented and described started me down this path of, like, well, maybe there's a way that you can reconcile and you can bring together worldview and a metaphysics that describes how things work, and have that apply in technology systems.
That's interesting. So I see you worked for two rather large corporations, Amazon and Activision. What was the culture like there?
Really interesting. So two very different cultures and two different perspectives on how to approach things. I'll say the Amazon culture is really driven very much by their leadership principles. There's a dozen or so of them, and it's one of the few places I've worked where a set of corporate tenets really does get applied effectively and really becomes used in the right way. And I will say that my experience in, say, taking something like customer obsession or earns trust, and these are all Amazon leadership principles, and taking those and going through the exercise of letting tenants inform decision making, and saying, is the decision I'm about to make going to improve the customer experience? Is it going to earn trust with my colleagues? Really helped me understand the value of having those kinds of frameworks and mental models for thinking about things. And to Amazon's credit, they did it very well. They really were able to ingrain those principles in much of the operations and how the hiring happened and how meetings were run, and so that was great. The flip side of that would be, I enjoyed my time at Amazon, and this is no dig at Activision, and not a dig at Activision by any means, but just as an example of how some other, corporate tenets may not necessarily translate in the same way. There was one that they had of a very small list. One of them was the battle of the best ideas, which I think was well intended. Of we want the best ideas to win. I think it was interpreted internally, especially in a gaming culture, as the battle was the part that people like really, they latched onto the battle part and less the idea part, and so it produced. I think it may have had some unintended consequences as but it was a gaming culture, and so I think that the whole competition part was all very much part of it. uh, built into it. So, and it's one where I would have, reflecting back on some of these Taoist principles, probably would have said that, harmony was maybe not the highest virtue at Activision.
Yeah, I think,
So,
having been a consultant at many different big corporations myself, I've seen a lot of like list of values and things like that. And I often think to myself, people are taking the time to do this, but I don't see them applying it when they're talking to the vendor, when they're making decisions. And it's interesting because if you think about it, whomever came up with that list at the time, that was what was supposed to be representative of the values of the company, like how the company is supposed to operate. And so you would only make sense to use that to inform your decisions that you're about to make. And I mean everything from, who to hire and fire to who to work with, which direction to take some project in. It just makes sense, because if this is what defines your company, then why are we not using it as like the roadmap for informing the decisions that we make? I see that a lot. I think it's a way people waste time by creating this list of values and then never ever doing anything with it. We hear like my wife and I co-own multiple businesses together, and we always have a set of values, but we instill those into our staff. And when we have a membership platform that we utilize, and when a customer has a problem, we tell the customer service people, you can pretty much solve any of the problems that come through by using these principles. And when they apply those, we get happy customers. When they don't apply them, we get complaints. So it just makes sense. And I also think, I'm a big fan of consistency just in everything. Like, if you were talking politics with me, I don't really care what your political belief is. And by that, I mean, it's not that it doesn't, affect me in any way, but I just mean like it's your belief, and it's okay for you to have whatever belief you want, as long as you're consistent. Because if you're like, if you have beliefs that are like way over here on the right hand side, and then you have a bunch of beliefs that are way over on the left hand side, how do I know how to work with you? It's just too difficult. I like consistency, and I think having a way to inform your decisions every single time creates consistent decisions, and it makes for better business. So that's interesting. So I would never have thought that Amazon would have been, well, I mean, it makes sense that they're more regimented than, say, a gaming culture. I know people who've worked for Blizzard Entertainment, another big gaming company, and
sister company to Activision.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah.
It's an interesting culture, but Amazon being more regimented sort of surprises me in a way. I'm not sure why. It just sort of took me, like, I was like, oh, that's interesting when you said that. Especially the using tenets to inform your decisions. That's, to my way of thinking, is brilliant. Around what time period did you work with Amazon?
From 2017 to 2021. So
it's after the whole decision engine or suggestion engine thing had been built. Because I had an incident with a CEO once who Amazon came out with that their suggestion engine, and he spent about $2 million to build it, and he wanted that for the food delivery service. And I said, well, you're going to have to pony up some money, because I can't do that. A data warehouse isn't cheap. And he didn't understand, typical non-technical person didn't understand, why can't you just write code that suggests things to people? Well, it's not as simple as it looks.
Well, so, the interesting thing about that is that Amazon's obviously famous for their ability to recommend products, and that's how they made their fortunes, is being able to tell you that the people that bought what you just bought also bought a bunch of other stuff.
Buy this.
But they don't ever stop with that suggestion engine innovation stuff. And actually, part of my job when I was first hired was to build a recommendation engine that would recommend cross-category products. So to get folks who may have already purchased many products from, say, like their clothing line, to get them to be interested in automotive, for example, which was I think a gap that they had at the time. And I'm sure that even today they're continuing with finding new ways to optimize their recommendations and build new systems to do that kind of stuff. They never stop.
I think the ingenious part is, you buy a battery driven piece of electronics,
Yeah.
and they recommend to you the batteries,
Uh-huh.
and they recommend to you the power cable that goes with the thing, so it doesn't have to use batteries. I think
Yeah.
that's ingenious because they're taking, I mean, as someone who, like, I've dealt with people who are very technical and people who aren't. And usually what's funny is when someone buys something, they're like, well, but I don't know which battery it takes. And I don't know what kind of power cable it is.
Uh-huh.
Well, they're just answering that question for you and making it
Yeah.
a lot easier. But also, I think that Amazon has kind of gotten the reputation that Costco has, which is a good thing. That, you buy something from there and it's the wrong thing, you can return it. They're not going to stress out about taking it back. And I
Oh
think that's
yeah.
huge, you
And I
know?
think that, yeah, that comes back to that's a very deliberate call out to their leadership principle around customer obsession. And they, um, like I was mentioning earlier, internally, it is, they live it, and it's a really, at least it's a broad generalization. There's hundreds of thousands of people that work there, so like any company, you're going to have folks that apply these principles in varying degrees, but they certainly intend and do, for the most part, really well at keeping customers top of mind. The notion of earning trust and of doing all those things are real, and it really shows up.
Yeah.
Like
No,
return policy is a good example of that.
yeah, I mean, I've seen it in other ways. Like when we moved to Vegas about a year and a half ago, when we moved here, we purchased a locking box that sits in the front,
Mm.
and you can put any codes in it that you want, and you can just attach it to like address line 2 on the package. Please use this code, and then they key in the code. It opens the box. They drop the package in, close it. No one can steal the package. Multiple times, and we also have a Ring doorbell, so multiple times I've caught the guy on Ring doorbell. He'll look at the package, he'll look at the box, and he just throws the package on the ground. So, never said anything about it. And then one day I got an email from Amazon. It was actually very recently, talking about holidays are coming up. It's our job, we want to protect your packages, so we want to make sure that you know about the ability to pick it up at a package locker. So I thought, I'm going to say something about this. And so I said, well, I have a package locker and you guys don't even use it about half the time. Do you know
Yeah.
that the person from the logistics department called me on the phone and said,
Did
you
they?
know, could you show me some orders where this has happened? And so there was one that was perfect. There's the box in the picture, and there's
Yeah.
the package laying next to it. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
said, see that big brown box? He's like, yeah. I go, that's the package locker. And look where your driver put the package. Do you know that after that, every delivery has been inside that package locker? Somebody said something and took
Yeah.
care of it.
Yeah.
And it's just one of the things, it's interesting thing here in Vegas too, that we noticed is almost everything is available same day delivery, because we have about 15 Amazon warehouses right around us.
Yeah.
Their ability to get you the products quickly is, how was like your department structure? Like, where was there like a lead and then people underneath that, and then the lead reported to whomever was above them?
Uh, yeah. I mean, that's in a pretty traditional sense. Yes, everybody uh, sort of works in that way. I think the part that I found interesting that really worked well from a product development standpoint was this notion of a single threaded leader, which would be a senior product person, um, and they would own a feature or a product, or some aspect of the system, and then have under them analysts, program managers, engineers, and be able to run each of these individual features or products as kind of mini startups, which I thought was really cool. And that was the role that I was in. Was one of these products was the cross category recommendation thing that I had mentioned to you, and so that was a good opportunity to, for someone who's in a leadership position, to have control over, or to have a view of and a say in all the aspects of the development of your product. And it was good for me. It was a great experience in understanding how, as a leader, things like frameworks can really help to get cross-functional teams on the same page. And so, if you're talking about philosophical framework, whether it's the leadership principles at Amazon or these sort of Taoist principles that you can get out of the Tao Te Ching, when they're clear and concise and they're well known, then you can have those team structures where everybody on the team can understand their leader effectively and understand with how they're making their choices and how they're making their decisions, and it trickles down in a pretty good and effective way. So that was the Amazon structure, was for the most part the idea of a single threaded leader owning products, and then the single threaded leaders would work together to integrate and do that kind of stuff.
I know, like, it's becoming a common theme today. Like, one of the problems people have is management without authority. So you're the person in charge of one department, and you need another department to do something in order to progress your project. You have no authority over that team. So what do you do? So what a lot of companies are doing, and I actually think this is a bad thing, not a good thing. I think instead of what they're doing, I think they should teach people how to manage without authority and teach cooperation and collaboration. But instead, what they're doing is they're taking pieces of the software development team, pieces of the network engineering people, and they're making little mini teams that run a product. And so that way you have your network engineering resource that you are in charge of. You have your software engineering people that you're in charge of. And it removes the, leadership without authority barrier. But at the same time, it isn't really teaching them how you still have to collaborate with other departments. Teaching that. But I do find it interesting that that's the direction people are going, because everything has to be out so quick these days. I mean, I remember being CTO for a restaurant delivery service, and they wanted a software release like every week. And I said, do you even understand what that means? Like, number of bugs we're going to be putting in front of our end user is going to be outrageous, and they're going to dread the release day every single week. They won't even, you'll find your sick calls are going to go through the roof, right? So I don't know, it's interesting stuff. But this is a question I like to ask everybody that comes on the show. So let's talk about it's about AI, and I would like to know your opinion on AI. As far as the future of AI, do you see it as being a positive thing or a negative thing, and why?
That's a fantastic question. I think that's a pretty highly debated question.
Yep.
I think my view is almost unequivocal positive. I think that there's sorry, I should probably reframe that to say until it's not. So I think, like, clearly in the short term, there's plenty of productivity gains to be had. I think the education space is one that's just going to blow up, where AI can really, really help, tailor curriculums and get kids to be more interested in things that matter. And I just think there's just huge opportunities there. The ways in which it can help with automation in the transportation area, in energy distribution and efficiency. I just think there's so many different spaces where we can really address some important societal needs until it becomes self-aware and then destroys us all. So I don't know. There's that end at some point, I suppose. But
I mean, that's what Elon Musk says, right? He says that as long as we keep an eye on the potential negatives, that there's nothing but upside to it. And I actually think he's right about that. I wasn't so sure of that, but I think he's right. Like to your point, there's two things that changed my opinion about AI, really. Like, one is my wife and I, we do a podcast and where we talk about just life in general. And we were going over an article where a lady had a child, I think they were 3 or 4 years old, and it had all of a sudden developed a really strange set of symptoms. And doctors did MRIs, CT scans, they could not figure out what was wrong. So one night she was awake, as I'm sure any mom would be when their child's suffering from something that no one can seem to figure out. And she sat down with ChatGPT and she fed it the entire MRI report, all of the conclusions, the things that were seen, etc. And it came up with a diagnosis. And she brought the diagnosis to the neurologist, and the neurologist says, I would have never thought about that, but based off of what I see in this MRI report, it could be. There's a test we can do, and sure enough, ChatGPT, 100% right, diagnosing a strange problem. But then that was one thing, because I thought, wow, now there's a practical use for AI. But then the other one is just AI being used for decision making. Like, okay, here's the scenario, these are the things that we've got to deal with, this is where we want to be. Theoretically, we're running, these are our averages that we're getting. You feed it all the data, and then it can kind of help you with decisions that maybe as humans we get so focused on, we have to do A or B, but maybe the answer is parts of A and parts of B, and AI is disconnected enough from the problem that it'll make that suggestion.
It will make that suggestion. Yeah, so the really interesting philosophical question I guess I would have about that would be, what would be the foundational criteria that it would use to determine where the virtue is in that decision?
Right.
And because I think at the end of the day, like, you're still talking about, from an artificial intelligence perspective, a form of data-driven decision making, like how to optimize outcomes based on data that's being provided to it. And in terms for optimizing outcomes, that choice, AI is great for that. Having decided that outcome is one worth optimizing is a complicated, more philosophical one, which I think comes back to where, my whole, message, I guess, these days is that that's a more philosophical and a philosophical framework is one that's necessary. Now, you could probably take AI and you could feed it, you can, train it to have that framework as a part of its decision making, which of the outcomes would produce more harmony, globally, or, which is the one that is more adaptable and balanced and simple. You could certainly do that, but I think I would make the point that that's an important part in relying on. It's a step, yeah, in relying on AI to make those kind of decisions.
It's a step. It's a step. It's almost like having a consultant that you can bounce an idea off of. It's still your decision to make. You still have to make the right decision. You still have to weigh the positives and the negatives. But perhaps it can help open your mind a little bit. It's something. It's honestly, something that human beings tend to not be so good at, is being more open-minded about things. We get an idea in our head about something, even as I can remember a time I ate a Carl's Jr. hamburger, and then about 3 hours later, I was in severe pain, and I thought, oh, I got food poisoning. And even though I found out from the hospital that it had absolutely nothing to do with the Carl's Jr. hamburger, it was probably 3 years before I ever ate another one. It's just, it's unreasonable. You do unreasonable things. And had I actually been reasonable, I would have equated, okay, I got sick. It was just a weird timing, but mentally, I'm less like, I'm not going there again. Cause you see the burger, you think of the pain, and you say no. But I think, AI, I laugh at what people are impressed by it with, like it can write an article. So that doesn't impress me. Software has been available to write articles forever. So it's not super. What is impressive is if it could take, like, what I would be impressed by is if it could take my competitor's webpage, tell me what the benefits are that they're offering, so that I could, put together a program that competed with it, or something like that. That would be impressive. And I know, I actually just saw something the other day that says that ChatGPT is going to be able to consume web links now, whereas before it would say to you, I have no connection to the internet. They've made it, and I think that's going to be huge. But again, it's you made the point earlier. You said it's good until it's not.
Yeah.
And then I brought up what Elon Musk said, and I think those two things are for sure true. You have to make sure that it's being used for the right things and in the right way. And let's be real, it's still in the back end, it's still software that someone's programmed. And if they're not ethical, who knows what you're getting back.
For sure. And the thing that hasn't happened yet that I think is really going to change a bunch of that stuff is the the elements that will lead to the sort of general intelligence. And so what I mean by that is I think at the moment, most of those language learning models are predictive in nature. So you're feeding it an input and it's using its training data to determine what it predicts would be the right output. And it's very, very good at that and can create seemingly new material out of these sort of predictions from its past. But what it doesn't do is like math, for example, and add two big numbers together unless it's seen those numbers before, unless it's in their training data. And so there's the part of our human intelligence that allows us to understand a problem and recognize it in its different parts. And so, hey, that's a math problem. So let me engage the math part of my brain to solve it using the math mechanisms to solving those problems versus the more language and linguistic oriented stuff. When those two things can come together, where these artificial intelligence systems can self-correct or check their own math, if you will, I think that it's going to be a kind of a step change in both the positives and potentially the threats, right? And so anyway, so I don't know how far away we are from that, for its ability to dissect its inputs and understand what parts of a reasoning system need to be engaged to produce an output. But I'm sure it's not too far away.
Well, it's like the chess world. I mean, for years they were complaining that chess engines were going to solve chess. Yeah. And then they came up with AlphaZero, an AI chess engine that they taught to play chess by feeding it chess games. Yeah. And one of the things that it did was it actually opened the game up to a lot of people because, in the past, when you're taught to play chess, you're told that, a pawn is worth 1 point, a knight's worth 3 points, a bishop is worth 3 points, rook's worth 5 points. And then as you're playing as a human, you're doing exchanges and you're saying to yourself, oh, rook for a knight, I'm losing 2 points here. I probably shouldn't do this. But what the AI does is it just keeps the objective in mind. The objective is to checkmate the king. And if I have to sacrifice every piece on the board and still end up with a checkmate, I'm going to do it. That's what it thinks. Yeah. And it has really changed how people play chess, because even the world champion at the time, Magnus Carlsen, he said he studied the games and started using some of the techniques that he saw the AI engine using, because he said to himself, it's overcoming the human limitations that we have, where we only see just so far. And it was seeing further. And I think you're right. I think when it can actually do math because it's doing math and not because it's seen the numbers before, that's when control is going to be required of some sort. We're going to need to really keep an eye on that. And I think my one big fear is that government's going to get involved, because my personal opinion is most governments, when they get involved, they just make things worse. So, because then they want to push it in their agenda, whatever their agenda is, they want to push it in that direction. And I think that there's going to need to be some controls, but I'd like to, hopefully the industry can handle it and not, government regulations. So, but anyway, well, this is Darryl. It's been a great conversation with you today. I've really enjoyed it. I encourage people to go find your book on Amazon. I'll have the link listed in the notes. But why don't you let people know how they can find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, you can find me at Twitter. My handle is DJK. One of my proudest technical achievements is securing a 3-letter Twitter handle from back when Twitter first started. So that's DJK. I guess I should say it's at x.com rather, not Twitter.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm on LinkedIn, Darryl Canaus. There's another great way to reach me. And the book is called The Architect Way. It's a adaptation of the Tao Te Ching, and you can go to thearchitectway.com and it'll redirect you to the Amazon page.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate your time and all the effort that you put in. And everyone, thanks for listening to Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. Hopefully you'll be back next week for another great episode with another great guest.